And welcome back once again to the adventures of the Monk and the Monarch. As always, me, the Monarch, and my co-host, Mildra the Monk.
Hello.
Now, you guys might remember last time we talked a lot about Mamoru Oshii and his work, but we kind of put one big aspect of his work off to the side. That being the Kerberos Saga.
A big reason we did that is because that work had. I know a lot of people will know about that through his work Jin-Roh, which is definitely one of Oshii's seminal works. But there's a lot more to the Kerberos Saga, to the point where I decided that needs to be its own thing, because that is a whole universe of things. It's kind of a early incarnation of the whole multimedia universe that we started to see various IPs do in the 2000s. Things like Project Dot Hack, or the compilation of FF7 and the Evilise Alliance projects, or even some of the shared universe stuff we see in certain novels. Uh, I'm not saying this was the first of this kind of thing, and it was definitely not intended to be that sort of thing, but you could say it laid the groundwork for it. Because the Kerberos Saga encompasses live action, animated works, manga, and I believe even a few audio dramas.
Yeah, the first official part of the Kerberos Saga released was an audio drama called Waiting on the Red Spectacles.
Hmm.
Now, it is not technically the first thing connected to Kerberos Saga, because weirdly enough, this whole thing got its start from two characters from the 99th episode of Urusei Yatsura. To be fair, I don't think he had the idea in his time when he made that episode. It was just two random characters from a joke, fast, like stand up soba shop thing he did that he carried into the Kerberos Saga.
I do remember you saying when we were doing prep for this that diving more into this made you understand why Oshii would make something like Vlad Love all those years later. Which at the time we did the recording on Oshii, we had said that Vlad Love was something that seemed very out of
Nabashin.
place compared to the rest of his work.
I rescinded that upon watching the Red Spectacles. For a lot of people, that's going to sound weird because what most people here in the West is going to connect all of this to is Jin-Roh,
Mhm.
which is a very dark and serious movie.
And we will get to that in a bit of time.
But there is a point in this that it gets fucking weird.
Now, the Kerberos Saga, I'd say, is not a linear series of events like a typical saga, like the arcs in something like Dragon Ball Z that are referred to as saga by both the official releases and the fan base. Is more of a series of stories that reflect a particular setting. It is an alternate history version of post-war Japan, the one where there was a lot of political intrigue over a few changes. The big one was that Germany won World War II, technically, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. It was because even though they expanded and eventually occupied Japan, Operation Valkyrie, the attempt to assassinate Hitler, was a success. And with him out of the picture, it created a whole political shitstorm that forced Germany to pull out of Japan and a lot of the other places that they had occupied.
Effectively, what you're left with is a very authoritarian and very militarized Japan.
I think something else is that this kind of occupation. This isn't like Code Geass, where you have that occupation, you have very Britishized areas of the country, but also a Japanese contingent. A lot of Japan has been thoroughly integrated into a lot of aspects of German culture. Like, you see German cars, the Kerberos unit, which we'll talk about, is using World War II era German weapons. A lot of the way the buildings are set up, and like this has just been accepted as how things are. So you don't have some contingent of people wanting to go back to the quote unquote old days.
Now, where a
And
lot of these stories are going to start coming from is a very specific incident that gets brought up a lot, where you have the namesake of the Kerberos Saga is the Kerberos, and
mhm,
kind of an autonomous military force that got really, really good at eliminating crime.
they are a counter-terrorist police unit. I'd say they would be analogous to SWAT in the U.S. or Gegen in Germany, or those sort of anti-terrorism units in various police outfits across the world. Some of the acronyms you're gonna hear regarding them are ones you're gonna be familiar with if you played Siege back in the day, like I did, or you're just a history nerd, or if you ended up watching Tropa de Elite, also known as Elite Squad, which is a very good movie. I will note, and deals with the absolute hell that is the fight against the cartels in Brazil. But that's another story entirely. The more iconic thing with the Kerberos is their look, which obviously is this exoskeleton version of Wehrmacht armor, just walking around with those and using M2s. No, not M2s. I forget the name of it, but like there's a lot of model figures to that. Apparently, there's Kerberos themed wine, which I don't know what would that taste like? The blood of Red Riding Hoods. But because of their effectiveness, they end up getting caught in inter-service rivalries and just internal politics.
And of course, you have
'Cause
the moment most people believe they overstepped the bounds, which becomes the premise for a lot of the stories we'll be talking about. The Kerberos incident, they ended up basically murdering somebody over a misdemeanor. That being someone doing the whole eating at the stand-up soba place and running off.
this is what's known as tachigui, or literally eating while standing up, which is done in fast food restaurants in Japan and was made illegal because we have to go a bit even further back because in this alternate history, the U.S. had a non-interventionism policy for both World War One and World War Two, which does lead me to wonder if they had financial problems post World War One because economically the U.S. was not in the best shape in World War One, and the big reason they joined with the Allies was they thought that if the Allies lost, then all the money France owed them would end up going nowhere. I mean, there are a bunch of other reasons why, but that's one of the big ones because you can always have a tie between war and economics. But the Empire of Japan joined the Allies instead of the Axis. At the same time, the Germans developed what was known the exoskeletons known as protect gears, which led to things like the Battle of Stalingrad going completely in Germany's favor, and it was actually the Axis powers that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki instead of the Allies. But as I said, the Operation Valkyrie, the plot of July 20th, was a success and pretty much killed off the Reich Party then and there. It was still authoritarian. You instead have German going back to the Weimar Republic, turning it from a fascist state into a constitutional republic. The big thing was after everything went down, there was an attempt to try and more modernize Japan, which is part of the things that led to the shit show politically, which is where you start to get to bigger issues with riots and terrorist attacks, in particular communist sects. And to try and combat that, you have things like the MP putting out more paramilitary forces to try and deal with it, which is where you get the Special Armed Garrison, also known as Kerberos. I know I'm going into a lot, but a lot of this is kind of build. A lot of this is a build up to the kind of things that you see in Jin-Roh and a lot of the Kerberos saga, which is why I had to go into that kind of thing.
Yes, but it's all that leads up to that incident and the attempted disbanding of the Kerberos.
While they were effective against the anti-government groups who would merge into what was known as the sect, because of that killing off the wrong person and tensions with the intelligence agency, public security, the dwindling favor of the sect, as well as Kerberos becoming more and more violent. That's where the necessity of them comes into question, which leads to a riot that was intended to be parallel to the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877. They launch a coup d'état. The JSDF gets involved. Things get worse, and the last remaining members of Kerberos get wiped out. Even though that's covering a big chunk of the saga, there's a lot more details within it. One of the big misunderstandings that people have with this saga is they look at like that first scene in Jin-Roh and think that it's going to be an action piece. When Jin-Roh itself is far more contemplative. That's not to say there aren't moments of action, but there's a far more psychological underpinning within that film.
And generally, when you do see the actual action, it's not like your big, grand kind of hell yeah, we see action kind. It's violent. It's kind of there to make you feel uncomfortable when it happens.
It is violent. It is very tense, and not something that's going to be treated in like an action scene in a lot of outright action films. Because I would say a lot of works that are within the Kerberos saga are far more analogous to political thrillers. Like just what I've described here, this sounds like something that would be more in line with a Tom Clancy story than anything else.
In the chronology, the earliest story you have is Jin-Roh, because this is while the Kerberos is still active. But when it starts with the Red Spectacles, you're basically seeing the last of the Kerberos fleeing Japan. They didn't want to give up power. There was basically a civil war fought over this. They lost.
Oshii did direct the film version of the Red Spectacles, and that same year there was a radio drama that was a prequel called While Waiting for the Red Spectacles.
Now that kind of takes place somewhat in the middle of the Red Spectacles, because the Red Spectacles begins with the one guy escaping, promising to return to Japan one day to fight alongside his brethren again. Waiting on the Red Spectacles is kind of that 3-year gap between him leaving and coming back. It's basically broken up into a bunch of little stories. You hear a lot of stuff like via radio about what's going on in the world. It's really hard to find a lot of actual solid details on that because it's a radio drama that never got translated.
With the actual film, it has its moments of serious and its moments of WTF, and there is kind of a tonal whiplash in parts, which has led to the Red Spectacles be kind of divisive among people. Like some people consider it incoherent, some people consider it just bad timing.
I'm going to point out something that might kind of add to that, and it's not a fault of the actual movie, but the version we got with subtitles. They botched the subtitle job on that movie very badly. There are obviously bits like in the middle of statements people are making that are not in the subtitles. It is literally the prolonged joke of seeing someone talk for like a minute and all that comes on screen is yes.
Yeah, so
Piece it together, but I had to actually kind of stop and think about like the first and last part of what was said and the full context to figure out what was supposed to have been said in the middle. It is a frustrating watch if you don't speak Japanese.
I doubt we're going to get a Criterion release anytime soon.
Yeah.
Apparently, there was a reprint of it in 2004, but it's kind of hard to get. It was from a trilogy box set that was just covering Mamoru Oshii's cinema work. I'd say if somebody was to try and get a physical copy of that, then they're going to have to pay a pretty penny for that.
Yeah.
You're dealing with something that's been out of print since the mid 2000s.
And I don't think it had that big of a printing to begin with.
No, those kind of things always have a limited run.
But yeah, you will see a lot of Oshii's other themes in Kerberos, but something somewhat unique to this is you will see a lot of themes regarding authoritarianism, loss of individuality.
PTSD.
It's something I actually didn't see a lot of people talking about is, in context of the movie, what exactly is this guy even fighting for at this point? Because you stop and think about, like, Kerberos, they weren't like the authoritarian power of Japan, they were just the military arm, effectively. So when they turn around and started fighting for power, it's like they weren't fighting for change. I'm pretty sure they were entirely okay with the status quo, they just were the ones enforcing it. So when they lose and this guy goes back to Japan, he's not fighting for power at this point. He's not fighting to change the status quo. You've got this guy who just doesn't know what else to do. He's a soldier. He fought. He's going back just to fight alongside his comrades again, but for no real purpose.
Pretty much. And that kind of theme of ends up showing up, and throughout it the theme of dogs being used as an analog. I mean, some of that obvious is through the name Kerberos being built on the name Cerberus. You also have the fact that in the film Jin-Roh, the Kerberos unit are described as dogs disguised as men, or wolves disguised as men. And of course, as a lot of people know, there's a lot of allusions to Red Riding Hood, going back to that whole, not just loss of individuality, but loss of humanity. Did you end up looking into the manga Kerberos Panzer Cop?
Mostly I watched the live action version of it. I think that only covered a portion of it.
It takes place before the Red Spectacles. Obviously, there was that adaptation. I guess one could see see the manga as like an extended version of what we would see with Stray Dog and with Jin-Roh. Between the two of them, obviously Jin-Roh needs no introduction or needs no detail from us. Everybody knows that that's a legendary classic. We've talked about that plenty of times. Stray Dog is the interesting one because it is a tokusatsu film.
I will note something unique about how Oshii is directing these live actions. He really likes to just sit on a shot, like for a prolonged period of time.
And looking at Stray Dog, it does put a few things in Jin-Roh into context because Stray Dogs is technically a prequel to Jin-Roh. I say it's an interesting beast just because it's very clear that this is a tokusatsu work in the early 90s. And some of the ways that it's shot are definitely of their era. The thing might be a little bit too lit for its own good. Like there's a lot of low budget daytime shots is what I'm saying. And I don't even know what the budget was. And unfortunately I can't find it.
Not high, I can tell you that. I do start to wonder if his choice of all of those prolonged shots were because of the budget. Because I don't think any of these films had a high budget to them.
When it comes to tokusatsu, if you want to see high budget with that, you're gonna have to look at, Toei or Toho. Even then, I wouldn't say their budget is the highest, given how they can be kind of cheap. It is interesting in terms of context and in terms of seeing the tokusatsu-ness of things. I give them credit for trying when it comes to trying to do live action versions of the Protect gears, but the tech wasn't. I don't think the tech was there, and more importantly, I suspect the reason there's more daytime shooting with that movie is because night shooting is more expensive. Like the permits you got to get for that are a higher amount.
I will give them this, even as far back as the Red Spectacles. The times you do see the Protect gear, it does look really good.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see much of them.
Can't imagine why. I'd imagine lugging that thing around was not only expensive, but probably a nightmare to work with, in the same reason that I have heard my fair share of horror stories about people trying to work the Godzilla suits over the years. I think the worst case was the suit that was used in Return of Godzilla in 1984. I told you this before. They drilled holes in the fingertips so that the actor wouldn't drown in his own sweat. I think some people have this idea of, what? How could suit acting be that exhaustive? You're not doing any voice acting or anything. You're just in a suit. You're in a heavy suit with a lot of more weight on you with these long takes. I know that for the early years with Godzilla, the people that they brought in with suit actors either had a background in baseball or sumo wrestling, which makes sense because they're looking for people on endurance. So I can see a similar thing because no matter how you slice it, the protect gear is plate armor. I have been in plate armor once. That is one time enough for me to say I should never be in plate armor again.
Yeah, another thing you're going to notice the more of these stories you see from Kerberos, they don't have happy endings. This is a very cynical project in a lot of ways. Back to the red spectacles. And this will also kind of explain what we mentioned earlier about how fucking goofy this movie got. Spoilers, I guess, for anyone who cares at this point. With the story of Red Spectacles is, again, the guy leaves, promises his friends he'll come back to fight again, makes it back 3 years later. There is a point, like, less than a third of the way into the movie is when shit just gets weird. This is because, effectively, the second 2/3 of this movie is a fever dream. He dies almost immediately after coming back to Japan, and all this crazy nonsense is his mind trying to process, like, what happened. Like, it's him trying to process why he's even fighting, why it seems his friends have just joined with the current Japanese government. And you get great lines such as, "There exists no friends or comrades in a tiny bathroom," which is just a hilarious line. That's why the second part of this got so weird, is it's him having fun with a fever dream, but it's still a guy processing all of the horrors of his own life and actions, and his own loss of purpose at the end of his life. We see that with Jin-Roh, where the guy basically just submits himself to the Wolf Brigade. Like, oh yeah, this is what I am now. I am a murderous, ruthless killer for the Wolf Brigade.
Which is why that rendition of the story of Red Riding Hood is outright tragic.
Yes.
Because saying that these stories do not end happily is one thing, but I'd say there's a bigger pattern of midway through you get this little bit of hope until reality hits you right in the teeth. Throughout Jin-Roh, you had the idea of the two of them. Maybe they'll have some chance of getting out of here, only to have it yanked from you at the 11th hour, where he has to kill her. I will note, after 99, we did get another thing with the Rainy Dogs manga, which also had a short story called The Killers. This was another manga. It was a 1-volume manga, and it took place after the failed uprising.
Now, this is something you'll note that is a bit interesting, is the name of the character escaped me. The same one that dies in the Red Spectacles is Totome. He's a character in a lot of these stories, so it's kind of interesting. Like, the very first movie released, we know his fate. He dies unceremoniously, very depressing. But then we start getting all of these stories about a character, like, you know where it ends. Like, no matter what happens in these stories, we know the outcome of all of this. And it's not pretty.
It mainly focuses on him following another member of Kerberos, Eito Kurosaki, who's a sniper. And included in that is a version of the Killer's short story that's set in the Kerberos universe. Admittedly, that was due to the fact that Oshii was doing a compilation movie, Killers, at the time. But you do see a lot of this whole tie-in stuff that he was working on as well. You don't have any sort of film work going forward. Like, in 2006, there was a radio drama called Kerberos Panzer Jäger. In 2006, a manga called Kerberos and Tachiguchi. Then collections of Kerberos Panzer Cop. I mean, you still had some other stuff following it, but it's mostly the Tachiguchi story, which is significantly lighter to an extent.
Yeah, there's this whole other story going on following the whole stand-up fast food thing, which is where basically he lets himself get goofy within the premise of the story. I mean, it's ridiculous that in this hyper-authoritarian society, one of the main running story arcs is a bunch of guys fucking around, basically.
Yeah.
All the themes are still there. Like, he lets himself get that goofy, yes. But he does a good job not making it seem out of place, which is not an easy line to walk once you get into a setting this heavy and dark.
I guess the feeling was since Todome's story was more or less done, and there's not a whole lot of room you can do with that story going forward. That going a bit lighter is probably the best option, all things considered.
Now, I haven't gotten a chance to watch that one, but the Takaguchi stuff does something called Super Live Mation. We briefly talked about Avalon last time, which is the same kind of technique is featured, but it's a weird mix of animation and live action.
Which is something that can be done, but it's something that is tricky to do.
I'll say I'm kind of sad we haven't gotten a lot more of the Kerberos Saga released because we're in a position. There is almost no like English interviews for this stuff. It only occasionally comes up in random bits and places. So it's hard to say what Oshii's actual thoughts and reasonings behind a lot of this were. And at the same time, I don't think it got like super big in Japan either. Like it seems like it was definitely popular over there, but it always seemed to take a back seat to other works of his, like of course Ghost in the Shell or Asai. And you don't see as much people like openly citing this as a reference like they do with something like Angel's Egg.
And yet, I'd say one of the biggest cases of very much drawing upon this was the Killzone games. Even though they've not outright stated that was the case,
Or outright tried to deny it, which I do not believe in the slightest.
yeah, I know that there was the claim that they were drawing upon something different, but I look at that in the same way I do the whole Requiem for a Dream wasn't inspired by Perfect Blue.
Black Swan was the movie.
Yeah, Black Swan was not
yeah, wasn't Requiem for the.
Requiem.
I think that's the one he did before Black Swan, which did have
Yeah.
a scene that was basically lifted right out of Perfect Blue.
Yeah, but both that and Black Swan, he tried to claim, no, I wasn't inspired by Perfect Blue, and nobody believes him. In the mid 2000s, there was a fan work that actually got a bit of attention called Images of the Last Battalion, which was a bit controversial because some people viewed it as a propaganda film. I don't think that was ever the intent. I think the intent was to try and visualize the alternate World War II that you have in the Kerberos Saga. I think some people saw that because of certain images, but you know how it is when it comes to taking things out of context.
Yeah. I do wish it wasn't so rapidly spread out to different mediums. Because
especially mediums that are harder to translate.
Like radio dramas.
Mm-hmm. Like there's some radio dramas that I have in my archives that have been translated, not dubbed over, but put in like a YouTube video with subtitles. There's that with a couple Lodos radio dramas. But when it comes to this sort of thing, there is one elephant in the room that is technically part of this thing, but is not fully acknowledged, and is something I talked about a while back. We have to talk about the Korean version. Il-Yang, the Wolf Brigade. The adaptation of Jin-Roh.
Now this was live action, correct?
Yes. And it did break even, but it didn't do what but even in its native Korea, it didn't do great. I will note, as a film, Il-Yang is fine. As an adaptation of Jin-Roh, it is a case of missing the point. And some of that is due to the fact that it was directed by Kim Ji-won. I mostly know him for things like A Bittersweet Life and The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, as well as I Saw the Devil. Now, don't get me wrong. All three of those movies I mentioned are very, very, very good. He also did The Foul King, but I haven't seen that, so I can't comment on it.
I will say his protect gears do look fantastic.
Yeah. And I liken that to the fact that they probably had we do know that the budget for it was about 17 million. Didn't do well in the as I mentioned before, it didn't do well in the box office in Korea. It just barely broke even. In fact, I can't even say it barely broke even because its box office was 6.2 million when converting. So yeah, it bombed. It was full. Its break-even point was selling 6 million tickets. It only sold just shy of 900,000. A big reason why I say it was a case of missing the point is it is full on an action piece.
Now, I
And
think you
don't get me wrong,
could
when it comes
easily
to
do an action piece that fits the themes and stories of Jin-Roh, but as a direct adaptation of Jin-Roh, yeah, that feels a little weird.
they did try and do an alternate version of the alt history to match a more Korean approach. Basically, theming around unifying North and South after heightening tensions in Greater East Asia, which led to the sect being formed. But the reason for the Protect gears is not because of a German influence, but to anonymize members of the special unit, which does not quite work. Because if you needed something to just anonymize them, why have something so German? Why have them still using German World War II weapons?
Yeah, that does seem a little weird. Like, I mean, it'd work, but to kind of change the origin of it like that is odd.
Oshii did go at a screening and did seemingly comment positively on it, but he seemed to be more impressed with the look of things rather than the story itself. Again, the biggest problem is that it tries to go full on action piece in a story that does not really suit that. Is it possible that you could do a full on action piece within the Kerberos Saga? Yes, but the story of Jin-Roh is not that. It is anything but that, and I think that's part of the reason it didn't work out. Of course, the other part of the reason was just being really overcomplicated with things.
It is kind of the thought that, like, do you really need a live action Jin-Roh?
I mean, we technically had that with with the Tokusatsu movie, but that was going for a different vibe. It was covering a different story in the Kerberos
Yeah.
Saga. It wasn't just doing Jin-Roh in live action.
It probably would have benefited the movie to do something similar. Like, there's so much time frame you could have covered. And again, these Protect gears do actually look really good. There's plenty of times you could have said a live action piece in the Kerberos Saga that would have made sense to do a full on action.
Like
Especially if you're doing the actual uprising.
if you want to do an action piece, I'd say setting it around the just the full on riot situations with the sect would probably be the easiest to do. The time frame before Jinro, and it does end in a happier note, quote unquote.
I mean, that's like considering the happy ending of a Lovecraft story is the guy's just alone and crazy living in a cottage somewhere now.
Yeah, but even
It's
even
happy
that,
by
like,
comparison.
but even that, and the fact that the pair involved ends up successfully getting out of Seoul, I feel like that was again missing the point.
I mean, maybe if they both get out and still end up dead, it kind of still has that inevitability at the end of it all. Like, there really is no escaping. Even that, I think, would have been better fit with a different story than Jin-Roh.
As far as where someone might find and delve into this, obviously Jinro is an absolute must, but I'd say beyond that would be the Red Spectacles and the Tokusatsu movie. The other stuff is nice, but I won't say it's necessary.
Yeah. Red Spectacles and Jin-Roh are going to give you, like, the most complete picture of the Kerberos Saga between the two of them. Red Spectacles, as I mentioned, it can be a hard watch because of those subtitles. As long as you're prepared for the whiplash, it's really hard to describe just how bananas that fever dream ends up getting.
If after that you want more, I'd probably recommend looking at Kerberos Panzer Cop, also known as Hellhounds Panzer Cops, or just Hellhounds, which has had a couple reissues that contain both volumes along with some expanded stuff. If you can find a transcript of the radio dramas, maybe those, but those are not exactly high priority. The three that you should be focused on, that are best to focus on, is the Red Spectacles, Stray Dog, and Jinro. Though I think the bigger question is when it comes to those three, what order would you recommend people watch them in?
I don't know if it matters too much in this case.
Fair. And I think all those three were put in that collection.
I would say, actually, thinking on it, Red Spectacles and Jin-Roh, I don't think the order matters too much. For Stray Dogs, I would suggest watching Red Spectacles first. Just because I think it's somewhat important to go into those other stories with Tobame, knowing how it ends. Like, I think that was always the intention. So I'd definitely start with Spectacles before Stray Dogs.
Obviously, with Jin-Roh, there is a dubbed version, but for a story like this, I feel like watching it in subbed is the recommended approach.
I think I've only seen it subbed, so I can't comment on how good the dub of that one is.
I saw it once in 2002. I think there may have been a redub at one point. Don't quote me on that, but it was fine for the time. I mean, we are dealing with dubbing in the early 2000s, so you get what you pay for.
It's a crapshoot.
I don't remember it giving me too much issue, but I only saw it once, and the times that I've done rewatches of Jin-Roh have been the subs. Because with a story that is this tied to this alternate history Japan, I feel like watching that dub doesn't feel right. I can't explain why.
I think it would be fun depending on how good the dubs are. If there was a redub, that might be worth watching. But I'm not sure if there's been a redub either. I think you're right.
The last time that I ended up watching a redub was for a re-release of Sailor Moon, and I'd only watched one episode of it just to get a feel for the new voice cast.
Turned out well, at least.
It was fine. Some people were raising a stink on the matter, and I'm like, it does what it needs to do.
I mean, let's be real. The original voice cast was also just fine.
Mm-hmm.
That was more just weird localization changes, like making the lesbians cousins instead.
Yeah,
they do all the same things, and it makes it.
Yeah, everybody's well aware about that. But the point is that I don't have the same dub versus sub debate in my head like some people do, because I fully understand that it's not a black and white affair.
Yes, this is one again. I wish we had more details to go on, but because so much of the Kerberos never came stateside, and he just doesn't seem to talk about it a lot, we're left with very sparse details on what is otherwise a pretty expansive saga. And it definitely falls in theme. Like, if you've seen his other big work, Ghost in the Shell, you're going to feel right at home with Kerberos.
Maybe it's for the best that nobody's tried again, because I'd rather that than somebody do it and completely cock it up.
Who knows, maybe we'll start getting more renditions of it just brought over through fan works.
We already kind of had, and it's not uncommon for me to see cosplays of it, or some of the interesting cosplays I see out of the Japanese airsoft community.
Look, I would love to put on a set of that armor, but not for long periods of time.
You definitely wouldn't want to do that at like Matsuri, where it's in the middle of the damn summer.
Look, I already showed up with that Kefka outfit one year. That's bad enough.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how much worse the protect gear would be. I would have to have like built-in air conditioning to make that doable.
Either that or you'd have to have that giant cooling setup that was used for RoboCop.
I don't have that kind of spare funding to spend on the costume.
Yeah, pretty much. And I don't think a portable fan is going to be enough. I think you need something industrial grade.
Would that even work? You'd have to get through the armor.
You're not armored everywhere.
Pretty close.
Then again, I have seen people in full-on Space Marine armor at conventions.
We had a Mecha Godzilla one year at Matsuri. I don't even know how he pulled that shit off.
It is amazing what someone will do with with time and obsession. I'd say with that we've covered everything that we could. I mean, there's obviously plenty of merch and plenty of model figures, but that's not something we'd cover.
Yeah, I enjoyed actually getting a chance to look over a lot of the stuff from Kerberos. I didn't realize how expansive this was prior to our original talk about Oshii.
Yeah, I think it was the smart move to move this into something else.
Yes. So yeah, I think then we'll go ahead, wrap this up here, and we will see you guys next month.
Stay frosty.